Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you for registering for Al Ihsan Academy's Ilm Summer Camp. I am Ismail Chartir, and I'll be the one who is teaching you the 40 hadith of Imam An-Nawawi, inshallah ta'ala. I wanted to start out by giving you bushra from the beloved of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who said, "Man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilmin, sahalallahu lahu tariqan ila jannah." So who said, whoever traverses a path of knowledge, to obtain knowledge, to seek knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the path to paradise easy for him. So this is a glad tiding for those who actively are seeking the understanding of the sacred sciences of Islam. Now, traversing the path of knowledge is of two types. The first one is an actual physical traversing the path. Well, this is where you get up from the place you live, you get in your car or on the bus, and you travel to another place where lessons are being taught. Or in the case of the internet, you actually get out of your bed, you walk to the computer, you turn it on, and you go to the link. So this is a physical traversing. And the second one is an abstract traversing. It's an abstract idea of following or getting on a path. And this is following the path of the scholars. And this is in your studies, in making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for you to learn these sciences, to seek these sciences, to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from anything that would stop you from obtaining your goal, which is becoming knowledgeable of this. And the most important one that most people forget, that's revising this knowledge, to go over it again and again so that you understand truly what is going on. So whoever traverses a path to gain knowledge, then inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it easy for him to enter into Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who have an easy time entering Jannah. Ameen. This hadith covers both types of traversing, the physical and the abstract. A person, when he's revising, when he's praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him tawfiq in his studies, when he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make everything easy for him, this is encompassing everything in this hadith. This is encompassing that abstract. But we must remember that seeking knowledge is not just for the sake of seeking knowledge. This is an important thing. We don't learn knowledge for argumentation. We don't learn knowledge for debates. We don't study the sacred sciences so people will say that we're knowledgeable about this religion, because we all know the hadith of the first three people that are thrown into hellfire. Right? This is done out of an insincerity. There's no sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in learning this knowledge. So we don't learn knowledge just for knowledge's sake. We learn knowledge to put it into our lives, to put it into action. And when we think about this, you can go to any university in America, any university in the world, and you'll find non-Muslims studying the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're studying Al-Islam. And a lot of times you find that these people have reached high levels of Arabic language. They've reached high levels of understanding the nomenclature of hadith. They've reached high levels of understanding this religion in a scholastic attempt, but not in a scholarly attempt. So their work is of no benefit to them whatsoever. It's like ashes on a hot day. They disappear. They go nowhere. To the point where you sit with some of these Orientalists, you sit with some of these non-Muslims who have studied Islam at a high level, and they know way more than the average Muslim does when it comes to Islam. They know way more about the nuances, the subtle nuances of Islam than most people. But this knowledge does not benefit them in any way. This knowledge does not help them in any way. We have to remember that the objective of seeking Islamic knowledge is to act upon it, is to be part of your knowledge. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said, وَالْقُرْآنُ الْحُجَّةُ لَكَ أَوْ عَلَيْكَ, that the Quran is a proof for you or against you. It is a proof for you when you're seeking Islamic knowledge and you're acting on it and you're working in it, you're living this religion that you're learning. It's a proof for you, and it's a proof against you when everything you learn is not being acted upon. In fact, everything you learn is being thrown away and you're doing the opposite. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from being those people who are like donkeys carrying books. Because this is what you become when you don't act on your knowledge, right? When you're not acting on your knowledge, you become a donkey-carrying book. And think for a moment how ridiculous that is. And think for a moment why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used that as an example when he talked about Bani Israel and their learned people. A person who has studied and gained knowledge of the sacred science and does not act on it is a fool. And it's a foolish thing to see a donkey carrying books. It's useless and it's blameworthy. So it becomes obligatory for us to consider a few matters before we start, to consider a few things before we start explaining the sacred hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before we get into the text that we're actually going to be studying, we need to understand some things, and it's obligatory for us to understand these things before we can move on. And the first matter is actually the first hadith in this book. So the first matter that we have to realize is إِنَمَا الْعَمَلُ بِنِيَّتِ that verily all actions are by intention. It is important that we purify our intentions. So what that means is, in the case of studying this hadith, how can we apply these hadith to our lives? This hadith, we need to have certain intentions before studying and teaching these hadith. The first intention that we must have is we must want to fulfill the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to have the intention in our hearts that we want to live by the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fulfill our obligation that Allah has given His ummah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعْلَمْ إِنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ فَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Know, so have knowledge, be knowledgeable that verily your God is one God and He is Allah. And then seek forgiveness for your sins. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us some very important things. And Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullahi alayhi, he puts a chapter heading of his book. It's called Bab al-Ilm al-Qawli wal-Amal. So it's the book, the chapter of knowledge before speech and action. And this is what Allah is telling us in this ayat of Quran, He's telling us, fa'lam, have knowledge, know for sure. Know for sure, have knowledge, gain knowledge in what? In this speech, in this qawl. Innahu la ilaha illallah. That verily there is nothing worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thumma, then we seek an action, we seek forgiveness for our sins. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in this very easily, very clearly, that we have to know before we can act. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Are those who know equal to those who don't know? Do those who have knowledge, are they equal to those who do not have knowledge? No, they're not alike. They're not alike. The seeing is not like the blind, and the blind is not like the seeing. When I was younger, I was quite an arrogant young man, and I was full of myself, and I thought that I had a lot of knowledge of the world around me. And one day I walked out of work and my car wouldn't start. And I realized that of this idea, I was completely ignorant of my car. I didn't know how it worked. But there was a guy who was completely ignorant of the world, completely ignorant of politics and science and nature and everything around him. But at this time, he was superior to me because he knew how my car worked, and he got my car started. This is someone who knew something, who understood something that I didn't understand. So we need to take that lesson. The one who knows is not like the one who doesn't know. And in this case, he was superior to me. And I learned a very valuable lesson from that. There's another famous hadith, وعن أبي أميمة وقال ذكر لي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم راجلان أحدهما عابد والآخره عالم. So there were two men that were mentioned in front of the Prophet ﷺ. One of them was abid, one of them was a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the other was a scholar. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فضلوا العالم على عابد كفضلي على أدناكم. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the superiority of the scholar over the worshipper is like my superiority, meaning Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's superiority over the least of his ummah. ثم قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله وملائكته وأهل السماوات والأرض حتى النملة في جزرها وحتى الحول حتى حوت ولا تسألون على معالم الناس الخبر. And that all of the angels, Allah, His angels, and all the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth, even the ant in the hole, even the fish in the sea, they make salat on the one who teaches good to the people. So this is what happens for the alim. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من يريد الله بهما خيرا يفقهه في الدين. So when Allah wants something good for a person, He gives them understanding of this deen. So obviously Allah is showing us, the Prophet ﷺ is showing us that the one who knows is way different than the one who doesn't. That knowledge is a requirement of every action, of every speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, يَرْفَعُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَاجَةً. That Allah raises those who have iman and those who have knowledge in degrees. Now the thing that's interesting to look at is that those who have iman, when He says, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who have iman are also those who have knowledge. Because people who have knowledge have iman, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has singled out the ones who also have knowledge over those who have iman. So He singled them out. Why did He single them out? To show their superiority. To show that they're a special group of people. To emphasize that those who have knowledge will be raised in higher degrees than those who don't have knowledge. That the alim will be raised higher than the abid. This is something that's very important that we have to do. We have to realize that this is encouragement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to seek knowledge. That this is Allah Azza wa Jalla telling us to seek knowledge of the sacred sciences. To devote our lives to understanding this religion. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "At-talabul ilmi faradatu ala kulli Muslim." That seeking knowledge is a duty upon every Muslim. Now the obligation for seeking knowledge is also of two types, right? And you guys know this. There's fard ayn, the individual obligation, and then there's that which comes to a communal obligation, fard kifayya, which means that if a certain number of the ummah are maintaining this, if a certain number of the ummah are doing this, then everybody becomes free from blame. But if that number isn't reached, if enough people aren't seeking this knowledge, then the whole ummah is blameworthy. So one will ask at this point, what is the difference between knowledge that is obligatory for the self and knowledge that is obligatory for the individual, or for the community, I mean? The first thing you have to realize is that knowledge that is obligatory differs from person to person. It differs from person to person. Because if you look at it in a realistic, real-world sense, when you're 7 or 10 years old, now it's time for you to pray. So it becomes obligatory upon you in that time to learn all of the ahkam of salah, all of the ahkam of tahara. So if you don't know these, then you become sinful at that time. If you're a person who their wealth reaches 85 grams of gold, then it becomes obligatory for you to learn the fiqh of zakat. If you don't have that 85 grams of gold, there's no reason for you to know that, right? Because you haven't had anything to get there to teach that. So it doesn't become obligatory on you until you have that. When Ramadan comes, alhamdulillah, and someone has reached the age of puberty, right? They've come to the full age of being a man or a woman, then it becomes obligatory upon them to learn the rules of fasting. Likewise, if a woman, a sister, becomes haid, starts to have her menses, it becomes fard on her to understand everything that goes with menses. But before this, she doesn't need to know that. Just when it happens, right? She needs to know how to clean herself. What's the difference between blood that is menses and blood that is natural? She needs to know all these different rulings. But it's only obligatory on her when it comes to that life, just like childbirth. It becomes obligatory on a woman to know what is fard for her when she's nifas. But before that, she doesn't need to know. It's not obligatory on her. Likewise, if I was to enter into a business deal, right, I was to start a business and I was to start making money and I was to start doing these, I would have to learn all of the ahkam of buying and selling. But for most people, they don't need to know the very specific. They can get by with the general, so it's not fard on them. I think we understand this point now. I think we understand what I'm saying, that it's different for every person. So we need to remember that طالب العلم فرادة على كل Muslim, that the first intention must be to fulfill the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fulfill the command of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said this, when he said طالب العلم فرادة على كل مسلم, على كل مسلم. We have to fulfill this, We have to understand that that the seeking of knowledge is fard on all of us. Now, the second intention that we should have is we should wish to lift ignorance from ourselves and then lift ignorance from others. This should be the second intention that we have. When a person studies the sacred sciences of Islam, he or she by doing this act is actually lifting the fog of ignorance off of them. Because knowledge is the enemy of ignorance. The two can't live together. If you're ignorant of a subject, if you don't know a subject, say I don't know mathematics very well, I don't know how to add, I'm ignorant of mathematics. But when I study this mathematics, when I study how this works, I become knowledgeable of it, and that ignorance is taken away. It lifts that fog of ignorance. So if a person is ignorant of a subject, what should he do? He should study that subject. If you find yourself lacking in an area, you should go learn that area. That's lifting ignorance from you. And now how do you lift ignorance from others? You lift ignorance from others by teaching what you have learned. That's pretty simple, by teaching what you have learned. So when you have your children, and say you learned Qul huwallahu ahad, you know what you teach your children? What you have learned, and you've lifted ignorance from them. When you're giving da'wah to people, what do you teach them? La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. You're lifting ignorance from them. You're lifting this fog of jahiliyyah, and you're leaving them with knowledge. Now, whether they choose to accept that knowledge or live by that knowledge, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's your duty. That's our intention when we study. Our intention when we study is not to take the knowledge for ourselves and hoard it and say, this is my knowledge, this is what I've learned, but it's to give it back. No matter how uncomfortable or how reluctant we are to do this, this is our duty. This should be our intention whenever we learn. Imam al-Haddad, rahmatullahi alayhi, when he used to give dars, before he started every dars, he would start with this intention to give benefit and to receive benefit, to give knowledge and receive knowledge. And this is one of the greatest, imma of our time. The third intention that we should have is to preserve the Sharia of Islam, to preserve our religion, to preserve our deen. And when we say somebody is hafiz of the Quran, we're not saying that he memorized the Quran, that he's a memorizer of the Quran. We're saying what? That he's a preserver of the Quran, that he has taken it upon himself to memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to preserve that text for those who come after him. Now, what does it mean to preserve as compared to other things? It means to preserve the meaning of the Quran and the Sunnah, as well as the actual memorization of it. So we have different forms of hafiz, right? Different forms of being hafuz. One is bisadri, and that's when you have the memorization of something in your heart. Like the brothers who have memorized the Quran, they preserved it by their heart. But there's also bil-kitabi, which is by writing in your books. And that's the majority of people have memorized things. And this is how we have sciences that have been saved for us, like ulum al-hadith, ulum of tafsir. These things have been preserved for us by brothers who have preserved them by writing. Now we can't forget that preserving the understanding of the Quran and preserving the understanding of the hadith, this is done by knowing the understanding of our righteous scholars and the predecessors who preceded them. It's not a modern understanding. It's not modernity that we're looking for when we look at these hadith. It's not modernity that we're looking for when we study the Quran. What we're looking for is the understanding of those who came before us and how it applies to our life today. So that's something we also need to take into consideration. And we can't forget the most important part of preserving the Sharia, and that's by one's actions. It's very easy for a person to memorize. It's very easy for a person to write down notes and knowledge, write down notes and have not gained knowledge that way. But it's very hard for a person to smile at their brother when they see him and give him the salams. It's very hard for a person to always use the siwak before they make their salah. It's very hard for a person to preserve these physical acts of the Prophet ﷺ that are our Sharia. Now, I'm not saying that you should base everything on appearances, because as we know, there are people who have beards to their feet and have the shortest thobes, but do horrible, horrible things. So the interior matters too. The fourth intention we should have is we need to intend to guard this deen. And there's a difference between guarding and preserving. By guarding, I mean guarding and defending this religion from attacks. Right? And defending this religion is of three types also, three levels. The first one is against the non-Muslims, against their attacks, their false interpretations of our religion, the way that they attack the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and they attack the Quran. It's our duty to defend our religion this way against these. It's also our duty to defend against the munafiqeen, against the hypocrites who come into our religion. It's our duty to guard and defend this religion against them. And it's our duty to defend it against the people of innovation and desires. Now the question is simply, how can you defend something that you don't know? How can you defend something that you don't understand? How can you defend something that you've never studied? You can't. You can't defend Einstein's theory of relativity if you've never read it. You can't defend the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ if you've never studied it. Intention on seeking knowledge, it needs to be for the preservation and for the defense of Islam. Now, many of us today, we have this idea that we're going to seek only the knowledge of refutation. And this is how we're going to defend Islam. We're going to go and we're going to refute this sect, and we're going to refute this sheikh and this sheikh. So we go out and we start to learn only refutations. There's a whole group of brothers who know every refutation for every group there is in Islam. For every sheikh they say is off the minhaj, they have a refutation for them. But what they haven't done is they haven't studied the basics of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They haven't studied the basics of our aqeedah, of our understanding. So when group A comes and they learned about group A, they can get rid of it. When group B comes, they study group B, they understand where they went wrong and they can get rid of it. But when group C comes that they haven't studied, now they're confused. Because they've never studied our aqeedah, they've never studied our tradition. They've only studied the science of refutation, which has left them with no real knowledge. It's left them like empty reeds. We also suffer from the problem today of Sheikh Google, Imam YouTube, and Sidi Twitter, who everybody rushes to for fatwa or for understanding of hadith. If you have a question, you just type it in the Sheikh Google and here comes the answer magically in front of you. And this is a problem because knowledge in Islam is naqlin. It's passed down from person to person, from sheikh to student. It's not disseminated by Sheikh Google, by Yahoo Answers. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of Muslims are getting their information today, is from Sheikh Google, from Imam YouTube. It's very easy to go to YouTube and type in the subject you want to learn, and all of a sudden you have 35,000 people who are not qualified to teaching the subject, leading you astray, leading you all different ways in all different positions. The only way to gain true knowledge of this religion is to have knowledge of usul and the basics. So when we're building a foundation of knowledge, you can't start with the higher level books. You have to start with the basic books. So this includes our first issue, which is to have intention, to have sincerity in your intention, really, to be sincere with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're searching for knowledge. And it brings us to our second one, which is acting upon the knowledge that you've learned, to take it and use it. Imam Ahmed said that the base of all knowledge is fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more knowledge you obtain, it should actually cause you to fear Allah more. Why? Because who are the ones who have the most khashiyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The scholars. They're the ones who fear Allah the most. So the more you learn in this religion, it should cause your heart to quake, your skin to shiver. to think that you're speaking about Allah without knowledge, that you're going and doing things that you shouldn't be doing without the proper understanding or the proper guidance from someone who knows. If you don't know, ask those who know. What's the greatest sin in the Quran? Allah starts out with idhm, sah? Then he goes to shirk. Then he goes to talking about Allah without knowledge. That's the greatest sin, higher than shirk. So we have to make sure that we act upon our knowledge and that we're not moving ahead of ourselves, that we're not talking about things we have no knowledge of. Because this is where we'll fall into problems. And the fruit of all knowledge is acting on what you know. That's the fruit of all knowledge, is acting on what you know. If we look at the lives of some of the great ulama, we see that they abandoned everything for the search of knowledge. And when they found the truth in knowledge, when they found the truth in what they were looking for, they stayed steadfast on it. They didn't move from that truth. There's a beautiful story of Imam Ahmed, rahmatullahi alayhi, when he was getting whipped for saying that the Quran was the speech of Allah and not created. And they said that they were whipping him so hard that they thought the whip was going to come through his chest. And the torturer got done torturing him and he fell to the ground, and a brother ran and gave him a glass of water, and Imam Ahmed said, "I'm fasting." This is someone who was steadfast in his belief, right? This is someone who found the truth, who understood the truth that the Quran was not created, but is the speech of Allah, and was willing to do whatever it took to stay on that, to die on that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَيَدِّلُ اللَّهُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. So Allah lets go astray whoever He wills. And this is by the knowledge of people. You can actually gain enough knowledge of something that Allah leads you astray because of it. You become convinced of your own press clippings, convinced of what people are telling you about yourself, to the point where you actually go astray. You have ujb. Your heart becomes diseased with kibr and ujb and all these diseases, to where you're just led astray, you're led to ruin. And Allah does this by your knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah and fiqh. This is the greatest test for people who want to seek knowledge, is not to be led astray by what you think you know, and to start claiming things that you don't have. And then He says, وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ, and by some He guides by it. And these are the true scholars, the ones whose names we still celebrate to this day. Imam Nawawi is a prime example, right? If we look at this, we all have this in us. We all know that backbiting is a sin. Is there anyone here who doesn't know backbiting is a major sin? No, but we all fall into it. We all fall into it, every one of us. This is not acting on our knowledge. This is knowledge that all the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam have, but none of us act on it. This is blameworthy knowledge. This is knowledge that will stand us in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll be blamed for this. Imam Malik, he said, know that if someone gossips to you about someone, that they gossip about you when you're not there. This is an example of knowledge that we all have that was used against us. Another great example is riba, taking usury loans. We know that Allah and His Messenger have declared war on those who do this, but yet what do? We run to it, we flock to it. This is knowledge that we have that has led us astray, that'll be held against us. Iblis has more knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than any scholar living today or in the past. He has more knowledge of any scholar. He knows who Allah is. He knows what the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were. He called Allah His Lord, Ya Rabbi. He knows who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, right? But his knowledge led him astray, because he was better than Adam. Ana khairu minhu. I'm better than him. All of us, when we start on the path of knowledge, even if it's this beginning stage, these primer texts that we're going to be studying, we have to remember our place, huh? We have to remember that this knowledge can lead us astray or this knowledge can benefit us. We need to remember that knowledge needs to be learned in stages. That seeking knowledge is a process that takes many years. You're not going to, at the end of this class, at the end of this month of Ramadan, you're not going to be a scholar of hadith. You're not going to even know the asul of hadith, the mustalah hadith. You're not going to know what makes a hadith da'if and what makes a hadith sahih. You're not going to know what any of the rulings are on hadith. So you won't be a scholar because that takes many, many years to become a scholar. 20, 30, 40, a lifetime dedicated to seeking knowledge. This is when you become a scholar. So there was no reason for us to go and grab Mukhtasar al-Khalil, which is the highest book of Maliki fiqh, and start studying it. And it has all these abstract points that we won't understand when we haven't learned the basics of Salah and Tahara. Right? It's like building a house with no foundation. So what we aim to do here is we're going to build the foundation, to teach you the basics, to learn the basics of our religion, so that we realize that knowledge is important. So that we realize that all the knowledge that we take is important. When I first started studying Islam over in Egypt, I would take big books to my shuyukh and I would say, I want to learn this book. And they would hand me a pamphlet. They would hand me a 2-3 page pamphlet and they said, no, let's study this. And I'd go back after the pamphlet, I'd bring them another big book and they'd say, no, let's study this. They gave me these small primer texts, 10 pages, 8 pages, 11 pages, 32 pages. That's what you start out with. You don't start out with, Bukhari and Muslim. You start out with the Nawawi. You start out with 42 simple hadith. Imam Malik was once told that a certain branch of knowledge was easy. One of his students said, oh, that is easy. Imam Malik said, no, it's not easy. Haven't you heard that Allah said, Ina sanulki alayka qawlan thaqila? Haven't you heard that Allah said, behold, we shall bring to you a weighty message? That's the Quran. For every word of the Quran is a heavy, weighty thing. It is reported that when the Prophet ﷺ received revelation that he would perspire from the weight of it. If it was revealed on a mountain, it would crush it. So there are no Islamic sciences that are easy. If someone is foolish enough to think that it is easy to pass through these many sciences in Islam, they'll miss out on the beauty of those ulum. They'll miss out on the understanding of them. And they will not settle in the heart of the person. Imam Zuhri, who was the teacher of Imam Malik, he said, if you gain knowledge all at once, you'll lose it all at once. If you gain knowledge all at once, you'll lose it all at once. It'll leave you, right? Because it didn't stick in your heart. But if you recognize that this is a weighty thing, that this is a heavy thing, that this is a crushing thing, it'll stick in your heart. And you'll know it. You'll remember it. And you'll never be fooled into thinking that this ulum or this ulum is simple. But these are weighty, heavy things given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The duties instated by faith are necessary to measure so as to regulate human affairs, to guide man, to prevent him from straying, to dissuade him from harming himself or from harming others. By recognizing the sacred law, by recognizing Sharia that exists to guide and protect us, we can obtain the reasonable equilibrium in this world and joy in the next. Vital to this knowledge is that we need to know Allah's will in our lives. As such, a core body of sacred knowledge has been made obligatory on all Muslims to learn. And again, that's the famous hadith. And if you hear me say a hadith 5 times in one lecture, it's probably a hadith that you should learn. It's probably a hadith that it's going to be on a test somewhere down the line. And that hadith is Talib al-ilm faradatul ala kulli Muslim. That seeking knowledge is fard, is obligatory on every Muslim. In our quest to gain and grow in knowledge, we have to take in 7 conditions. And some of these are recaps. So I want to recap some of the things I said and introduce some new things. And these should be kept in the forefront of our mind as we go through seeking knowledge. The first one is that Allah loves and honors the learned and the seekers of knowledge. Like I said before, Allah will raise in ranks those who have knowledge, those who have iman and those who have knowledge. And whoever traverses a path for the sake of knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make this easy for him, make the entrance into Jannah easy for him. The Prophet ﷺ also said, the world and whatever is in it is cursed except for the remembrance of Allah and whatever is attached to him and a scholar and a learner. So everything in this world is cursed except for the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever is attached to him, the scholar, and the one who learns the deen. Knowledge is a means to a goal, not the goal in itself. That goal is worship in action. Whoever seeks knowledge in order to compete with the scholars, to argue with the foolish, or to turn people's faces towards him, let him take his seat in the fire. Argumentation is not from this religion. It's not. It's a point of aqidah. We don't seek knowledge to argue and debate. We don't seek knowledge to compete with those who came before us and show where they were wrong. We don't seek knowledge to prove to the foolish that we know more than them, to debase them. And we don't seek knowledge so that the people gather around us, make flyers with our names on it, and cheer when we walk into the masajid. The most scary, horribly terrifying thing is to gain any kind of fame based on knowledge. Because this might be your reward in this life. This might be what Allah is giving you as this temporary fame, this temporary thing where everyone knows your name, and on Yawm al-Qiyamah you'll take your seat in the fire. So be careful. This is advice for me and for you. Wallahi, it scares me to give this class. Similar statements are echoed in the following hadith. Whoever learns knowledge by which is sought the face of Allah, but he does so only to achieve some worldly gain, shall not smell even the fragrance of paradise on the day of resurrection. So this is the warning to those who seek knowledge to get a paycheck, who seek knowledge to get the $70,000 a year position in the house and to put out CDs. This is a warning, and it's a severe warning. Abu Qilaba, one of the earliest zahids of Islam, he advised, if Allah gives you knowledge, give him worship. If Allah gives you knowledge, give him worship. And don't let your concern be merely to narrate to people. Don't make your concern to just be, I know this and this is what I heard. Only a fool repeats everything he knows. Only a fool repeats everything he says. The true scholars, the true learned men of this religion hide. Their gems are scattered among people. They're not up in the open, running around, flaunting their knowledge. They're hidden. They understand these hadith. And we have to understand these hadith, or we can't move forward studying. Learning knowledge must be prioritized. At the base of the pyramid is learning what is fard ayn, learning your personal obligations. The thing that is individually responsible for. In Al-Akhdari, Sheikh Abdurrahman Al-Akhdari, he says, مَعَوِّلْ يَجِبُ عَلَى الْمُخَلِّفِ. The first thing that is fard upon the person who has reached the age of legal responsibility is to purify their aqeedah. Then to know what is of them, of the fard ayn, on them, of the salah, of tahara, of fasting. These are the things that all Muslims need to know. In contrast with what is fard kifayya. Imam Rajab said, so it is obligatory on each Muslim to learn what is mandated by the religion in terms of ritual purification, prayer, and fasting. It is obligatory for those possessing wealth to know what is due on them in terms of paying zakat, financial maintenance of one's dependents, performing pilgrimage, and aiding in jihad. Likewise, it is obligatory on those in trade and commerce to learn what transactions are valid and invalid. Realize too that knowledge of the lawful and prohibited should be learned. We have to know what is haram, right? We're going to learn that hadith. What is haram is clear, and what is halal is clear, and what is haram is clear. We're going to learn that hadith in these 42 hadith. The golden rule in regard to as follows is afdal al-ilm, ilm al-hal, wal afdal al-amal, hifz al-hal. So the best knowledge is the knowledge of one's current state, where you're at right now. This is the best knowledge. And the best action is guarding one's current state. Which is to say, one must acquire as much knowledge as one needs to fulfill the obligations at that moment of his life. The duty that is owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to others. Everybody has rights. Allah has rights. Your brother has rights. Your body has rights. Or to refrain from a prohibition at that moment. It is important as it is, one must acquire secular or worldly knowledge, should not acquire secular or worldly knowledge, while being ignorant of what is fard ayn. Censuring those who adapt such a negligent attitude, the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, they know the outward appearances of this life in the world, but are heedless of the hereafter. We live in a time where everyone wants to be an engineer, everyone wants to be a doctor, but we're ignorant of how to pray. We're ignorant of how to give zakat. We're ignorant of how to do hajj. Right? So brothers spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to go to hajj, and they don't know how to perform the rites. They don't know how to do it, but they know how to make a lot of money. Right? They know how to count the businesses that they own and what they need to do to make more money and to diversify in these things, but they don't know the very minimum of their religion. And we've gotten to a point also where we praise people for doing the minimum of their religion. We're happy that Fulan prays 5 prayers a day. This is the minimum, right? We're happy that Fatima wears hijab. This is the minimum. So we need to really get to a point where this life doesn't deceive us anymore. And a lot of times we as imams and we as students of knowledge, we make a huge mistake. We tell you guys to abandon the dunya, which is not obligatory, right? It's mustahib. But we don't tell you to abandon sins and to gain knowledge. And that's what we're missing, is this idea of abandoning what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and gaining knowledge of what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In light of this verse, Al-Hasan al-Basri once protested, by Allah, one of them knows about this world to the extent he can pick up a coin and tell you the weight and its worth. Yet he doesn't know how to pray properly. Many still choose to skate on this thin ice today. For how many Muslims are well versed in the finer details of politics, football, fashion, celebrity culture, or just the latest cyber gossip, yet are woefully ignorant of the fard ayn duties, content with leaving their religious knowledge at a precarious or infantile level. The ideal way to learn is to study with a qualified teacher who has been granted license, ijazah, to teach by recognized scholars. This knowledge is religion. So look from on whom you take your religion. In the absence of such teachers, form a study group, basing it on humility and the ability to say, I don't know. I don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know. We all know the story of Imam Malik, right? When they came to him from Morocco and they started to ask him questions, and Imam Malik said, I don't know. And they said, what are we going to tell the people of Maghrib? He said, tell them Imam Malik said, I don't know. Saying I don't know is having half the knowledge. And you don't fall into the pitfalls of talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge. You need to think, reflect, ponder, and question, but never invent your own rulings or fatwas. Instead, cling, hold tightly to the divine order. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And if you have no one in your community that has knowledge, then you need to get someone who has knowledge. It's a fard ayn then to have somebody who has knowledge. If you don't have an imam, you have to have an imam. You have to have someone in your community who can help you. In your community, not Maulana back in the village in Pakistan, not the sheikh back in Egypt, but you have to have someone there who understands what's going on there. A brother went to Sheikh Shanqiti, rahmatullahi alayhi, and he said, the brothers in America have a question. Before he even heard the question, he said, tell the brothers in America to ask someone there. This is ilm, yani. This is understanding. Imam Malik once remarked, I did not begin giving fatwas until 70 of the people of knowledge testified that I am qualified to do so. Today we live in a position where a brother accepts Islam yesterday and tomorrow he's in the masjid telling people how to pray. One of my favorite things is when brothers ask a question and they say, well, is that from the Sunnah? That's one of my favorite questions that I get, because most people don't know what the Sunnah is. They can't tell the difference between Sunnah and Hadith. Or they want to ask a question that they have no knowledge of. And this is the problem that we suffer from. The Quran does not mince its words when it states, and do not say as to what your tongue falsely utters, this is lawful and this is forbidden, in order to forge a lie about God. Those who forge a lie about Allah will never prosper. We must know our own level and harbor no pretensions about the little that we really know. Simple ignorance. Jahl basit, simple ignorance, may not always be blameworthy, but of asking, seeking out, going around and pretending that you know what you don't know is always blameworthy. Going above your level is always blameworthy. Compound ignorance, jahl muraqaba, the ignorance of actually being ignorant, is a different story. One generally finds those who wallow in such a pitiful state to be highly argumentative, hostile, bigoted, and the enemies of the righteous. One of the scholars, they said, you can always tell the person who has no knowledge because he always wants to argue. He always has to prove his point. And the reality is, all points can be correct. Everybody can be right. There's an Imam Hujjah, and he was a judge in Turkey. And two men came, and they were disputing. So one man came, and he gave him his whole story. And he said, you're right. Then the other man gave him his whole story, and he said, you're right. And then his wife came and said, they both can't be right. One of them has to be right, one of them has to be wrong. And he said, you're right. So what he's saying is that everybody who's clever enough to argue their point can be right. But the Prophet ﷺ said, 2 out of every 3 judges will be in hell for misdoing what they're doing, right? For not understanding what's going on. It's easy to deceive people by speech. And this is what people who have very little knowledge do. Maybe they have the ability to speak. Khalil bin Ahmed remarked, there are 4 types of men. One who knows and knows he knows. He has learned, so follow him. 2, one who knows and knows not that he knows. He is asleep, so wake him. Number 3, one who knows not and knows he knows not, so he seeks to learn. So he knows nothing. He knows that he's ignorant, so he seeks to learn. So teach him. Then the 4th one who knows nothing and knows he knows nothing and is a fool. So shun him. It is vital that knowledge be internalized and rooted in the heart in order to be relevant, in order for it to grow within you, to have humanity before man and before God. Sound intention is key. Malik ibn Dinar, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said, whoever learns knowledge so as to act by it, his knowledge humbles him. And whoever seeks knowledge rather than that, it only increases him in pride. It only increases him in arrogance. Imam al-Dahabi advised, whoever seeks knowledge in order to act by it, his knowledge humbles him and causes him to weep at himself, at his own condition, at his own sins. But the one who learns knowledge to teach, gives fatwas, to brag, to show off, becomes foolish, arrogant, argumentative, perishes in his vanity, and is despised by others. He is indeed successful who purifies his soul, and is a failure who corrupts it. Yusuf ibn al-Hussein said, with adab, with courtesy, you understand knowledge. With knowledge, your actions are rectified. With actions, you are endowed with wisdom. With wisdom, you understand the worldly renunciation, zuhd. You understand to leave this worldly life and are given the means to achieve it. With renunciation, you cast aside the world. By casting aside the world, you long for the afterlife. And by longing for the afterlife comes the pleasure and acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to be really incredibly careful when it comes to learning. We can't begin to think more of ourselves because we've taken 1 class or 2 classes or 10 classes, or we have this or we have that, or we graduated from this university. We have to be careful. These are warnings from people who are far better than us. So when we seek knowledge, it should humble us. It should cause us to be fearful. It should make us realize that we're sinners, that we're sick in our hearts, and that Allah might be giving us knowledge to establish the hujjah against us. Not the hujjah against others, but the evidence against us. Like I said earlier, by it Allah leads some astray, and by it He guides some. You have to be careful when it comes to learning knowledge. You have to, I can't stress that enough, and how careful you have to be, because arrogance will take you. Arrogance will take you, and before you know it, you'll be issuing fatwa. You'll be telling people that you have this and you have that. You'll have all these signs of riya. You'll have all these signs of nifaq, and you won't have any sign of ikhlas. And like I said earlier, we all know the first 3 who were thrown into hell. One of them is the man who went and learned, so the people would call him a sheikh, so the people would call him a scholar. May Allah protect us from that. And that brings us to, why are we doing this during Ramadan? Some lovers of this fleeting life live their life in the fast lane, ever eager to keep their motors on materialism and in top gear. Some are content to cruise around in 2nd gear, 3rd or 4th. Others manage to barely make it through this dunya in 1st, But for the lovers, but all such lovers are bitterly averse to moseying along slowly, let alone in reverse. For believers, Ramadan is the time of year where we are reminded to ease off the accelerator and to be responsible and to responsibly slide out of the rat race, not just in our body, but our mind and our spirit. To leave for 1 month, abandon this world, abandon everything of the material world, and just concentrate on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 1 month. This is what Allah is asking us to do. We don't stop going to work, we don't stop doing this, but we don't spend our time in it. By stepping outside of this frenzy, we can regain our sinners and recess our true goals. Ramadan has the social and spiritual technology built into it to allow us to do precisely that, to reset our spiritual goals, to reset our center. And that's where these classes come in, because this gives us a great opportunity where we should have heightened activity instead of less. We live in an era where Muslims during Ramadan sleep all day and eat all night. We need to switch that back to the way it was when there was barakah in Ramadan, when there were countries were being taken and wars were being fought and masajid were being established. The Sahaba were active during the month of Ramadan. It was said they were warriors by day and monks by night. This is why Ramadan, this is why we increase what we do in Ramadan. This is why we have a Ramadan Ilm boot camp, to increase us in doing more in this blessed month, to make us want more out of this month than just sleeping and eating like cattle. That's why Ramadan. That's why we picked this holy month to go through these sacred texts. The words, the speech of our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during this month should be such a blessing on our heart that it illuminates the path to Jannah for us on the way out of this month. A lot of times, brothers, into Ramadan and shaitan spins them like a top. And they spend through the whole month of Ramadan coming out the same way they entered, missing out on all the barakah of Ramadan because they were so concerned with something before that it killed them during the month. This is taking time out of this spinning of this world to study the sacred text, to study what our beloved Muhammad ﷺ has given us in terms of wisdom, in terms of guidance. That's why Ramadan, ya akhwani. That's why Ramadan, huh? When we do this class, it's for ijazah. And in tomorrow's lesson, I'll explain where I got my ijazah from, who he is, who Imam Nawawi is, and we'll start to actually get into the hadith, inshallah ta'ala. But I want to take a few minutes here in closing to talk about the requirements of the class and what you'll need to do to be able to receive the ijazah in this class. Ijazah is not for the faint-hearted. It's not for the weak-minded. This is a real hardship that you're going to put yourself into. You're going to have to spend time outside of watching the videos, studying, reading, maybe watching the videos 2 or 3 times, asking questions, which we'll have a way to ask questions. We'll have a question and answer session. But as we go through, it's important that you take notes, because everything that I say from the beginning when I started out with Assalamu alaikum to the very last class could be on the final test. So even the talk today about intention and some of the sayings of the scholars, these things might end up on the test. Between every 2 lessons, there'll be a quiz. You cannot move to the next lessons until you receive 100% on the quiz. You can take the quiz as many times as you like, but you can't move on to download or watch the next lessons until you've received 100%. This is because there is no 99% in Islam. This is because if you take 99% and you pass it on to someone at 99%, who passes it on to someone at 99%, we're losing. We're losing knowledge. We're losing what is given to us. So there can be no 99%. That has to be 100%. So you might be stuck for a while trying to get the 100%, but wallahi, when you do, you'll know it. Right? If you take that advice where you look at this as a weighty thing, a heavy matter, and you look at what's being said and you take proper notes and you understand what's being said, then you should be able, inshallah ta'ala, to do it. I have one sheikh who's very, very rough on this idea of 100%, and I agree with him, so I'm going to be just as rough. At the end of the whole thing, there'll be one test. It'll be 2 to 3 hours long. It'll be timed, and you only get one shot at that. So even though you might get 100% on all the tests in between, if you don't get 100% on this test at the end, there's no ijazah. There's nothing. You have to retake the course a second time. I've had to take courses a second time, a third time. There's no shame in that. We have to divorce ourselves from our egos and say it's more important that I learn this knowledge properly and I understand it properly, then I have the ijazah saying I know it. Because you can go anywhere and study it. You can go online and find a recorded version somewhere on YouTube, and you can take all 40 hadith in 3 hours and you can say you know it, huh? But this is to prove that you know it, to pass down, to be in this chain of narrators. That's what's important, right? To have the ability to be able to give these hadith out. The ulama of the past, if you went to them and you quoted a hadith, they would say, who gave you permission to say that hadith? And if you had no ijazah in that hadith or in that book, they would dismiss you. We need to get back to that point again, where people are striving that hard and they're speaking only what they know, truly know. So we'll have between 12 to 15 lessons, depending on how long I'm going to ramble for. And then we'll have question and answers in there. And it'll be let you know the time before that there'll be a question and answer. So you can send your questions to the email, to the Al-Lisan email, and then we can print them up and we'll answer them then. Or you can email me personally and we can do that. But it's very important, and I'm not gonna, this will be the last time and I'm gonna end, that because we take this class over the month of Ramadan, we don't leave thinking we're scholars. We connect our hearts to the truth of what's being said, and we move forward, inshallah ta'ala. Don't forget that you still have time to register for class. It starts on Wednesday. You can go to the website or you can come to the classrooms at Masjid Abu Bakr and register the day of. Jazakumullahu khair for watching. Again, I am Ismail Chartier, and this has been Al-Lisan Academy's Ilm program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.